privilege to have you here tonight and want to thank everyone else for participating in this first of the 3 Thursday series. So Wei-Tai, let me introduce Wei-Tai. He and I were friends back in the 1990s when we were in an organization called the 1990 Institute, which was to promote the relationship between China and US in the 1990s. But since then, his passion has moved on to the climate area. And in 2006, he was trained by Al Gore on the Climate Reality Project. And since then, has given hundreds of talks relating to the climate crises. So we're very pleased to have you here tonight, Wei-Tai. Wei-Tai lives in the East Bay at Lafayette with his wife, Violet. And he, for fun, last year converted his home to all electric. Well, he'll talk more about that, if not today, next Thursday as well. So it's wonderful to have you here. We are mostly Valley Presbyterian Church members, but we welcome members from the Palo Alto First Pres as well, and other friends also. So let me turn over the floor to you, Wei-Tai.
Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm coming in to you from Lafayette, the East Bay tonight, and I want to start my story actually 15 years ago in 2006, when my wife and I went on a date, and we went out to the movies in the Orinda Theater, and we saw a film called An Inconvenient Truth. And just by a show of hands, how many of you have seen the movie An Inconvenient Truth? So you know that that film was a documentary about global warming and climate change, featuring former Vice President Al Gore. And one thing that I remembered coming out of the theater that day was that, oh my goodness, my reaction after I walked out of the theater was like, if what we saw was true today, we don't have 100 years to solve this problem. We might have only 30 or 40 years. And at that time, our children were only 6 and 9 years old. And so I want to show you a picture of my kids. That's Gareth on the one side in kindergarten, and my daughter Shelly with my mom in the garden in the backyard. She was 9 years old. And so how could children at 6 and 9 solve the climate crisis if we only had 30 years? So it made me wonder, and I actually spent the next 3 months reading everything I could on climate change to see if in fact it was happening or not. And I came to 2 conclusions. Number one, that yes, the planet was definitely warming and likely by human causes. And number 2, that our political leaders were doing absolutely nothing about it. And that got me very angry, because even if I, a layperson, could understand this was happening, why wouldn't our political leaders be taking action? And so I resolved, at least for me, to try to take some action and try to be part of the solution. Now, at the time in 2006, I was the head of my own advertising agency in San Francisco, Day Advertising. And I had actually run the business for 17 years. It was my own company. I had 35 employees and great clients, and everything in my life was absolutely fine until I saw that darn movie. And when I realized that, and I say that in jest, but every night I would come home and I would brush my teeth and I'd ask myself, what do I do today to be part of the solution to climate change? And every day I had the same answer: absolutely nothing. I was busy with clients, I was busy with my employees, I was stuck in traffic, I had all the excuses, but I was doing nothing. And it wasn't before long that that started to grate on me. And when I went to the office, I actually stopped enjoying work. I couldn't concentrate in meetings. I didn't enjoy it anymore, because I was having a moral crisis in my heart to be going to every day have to realize I was doing nothing. And in part, this was because I realized not only was I not being part of the solution, that I was actually part of the problem, because I knew climate change was happening and yet I was doing nothing about it. And so it wasn't before long that I realized I had to quit my job and quit my own company and take a new path and try to figure out what to do to be part of the solution, which wasn't really that easy. But make a long story short, I got into the solar energy industry with the idea that the more solar panels we could sell, the less fossil fuels we would rely on. And I also resigned from all my nonprofits, including the one I did with Alice there, and focused instead on climate activism. And I did get trained by Al Gore in 2013 to give talks about climate change. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. A little bit of my journey. I will say that back then I was frankly depressed and angry that we were doing nothing. But fast forward a dozen years from now to today, I'm actually genuinely more hopeful that we will actually be able to solve this climate crisis in time for my children, our children, and grandchildren. Okay, so today we're going to go through, let me switch over to the presentation that I have for you, and we will get started here. Okay. All right. So I want to actually start with this photograph taken by the first of the manned Apollo space craft in Christmas Eve of 1968, a little bit over 50 years ago. And I actually love this photo because it looks so vibrant and beautiful. And it reminds me that this big blue marble that we live on is the home to all of us, people, animals, fish, plants. We all share this one planet together that we know. This is the only planet that we know of in the universe that can sustain life in all of the universe. Now, you've asked 3 questions for the upcoming 3 weeks, and you ask 3 questions for residents of planet Earth. Okay, what are the questions we're asking that we're going to cover? What is the climate crisis? What does it ask me to do? And who does it ask me to be? Now, I actually have 3 different questions that I'm going to ask and answer during my presentation today. And that is the questions, must we change? Can we change? And will we change? These are really the essential questions to ask when trying to understand the climate crisis and what we're going to do about it. So let's go after the first question first. Must we change? Well, the scientific community all around the world has been telling us for a long time that yes, we definitely must change. And let's explore some of the reasons why. Actually, scientists have known for a long time, all the way back to the 1850s, about global warming. But it didn't really start taking off until, when you see in this photo, after about World War II, when it really started jumping up as we depended more and more on fossil fuels. And the burning of fossil fuels has actually been is the largest source of global warming pollution to date. And it's still going up, unfortunately. And if we compare the burning of fossil fuels to the temperature records, ever since temperature records were kept in 1880, you can also see a very clear trend that our planet is factually warming. Now, okay, I'm going to ask you guys a quiz. And do you guys use the chat here? Everybody can use the chat feature. Go down to hit the chat button and type in an answer to what you think, what year was the hottest year ever measured by weather instruments. Those are your choices, 1992, 2010, 2016, or 2020. Can you put it in the chat? And I'm going to see if I can see your chat. I'm not. Oh, there's 7 answers. Oh, a lot of people guessing 2020. Everybody guessed 2020. Wow, you got, all right. I think, 2016. All right. We're very close. All right, so let's just dive in. What is the answer actually? It's actually 19 of the 20 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2002. And the hottest of all have been the last 6 years. And if you guessed either 2020 or 2016, you're right, because statistically it was a tie. 2020 was actually 1/10 of a degree warmer, but statistically that's basically a dead heat. So unfortunately, these records are not the ones we want to be breaking as we are trying to deal with the climate crisis. but the implications for that, how many of you remember last end of summer, August, September, we felt some pretty warm weather here out in the Bay Area, right? All the dark red colors there. Los Angeles County recorded its highest temperature ever, 121 degrees Fahrenheit. And in Death Valley in August 16th of last year, it's 130 degrees Fahrenheit. It was possibly the highest temperature ever recorded on planet Earth. It happened in our state last fall, right? So these are unbearable statistics. And, you know, with the higher temperatures, we had a whole lot of wildfires last year, right? And who will forget that day on 9/9/2020, September 9th, 2020, when my wife woke me up at 9:30, it was still dark. And that's me in my pajamas taking a selfie to just remember like what life on Mars was. It was so red outside. And so these rising temperatures are having clear impacts on us here in the Bay Area. Now, if we take a look at those rising temperatures, but for the whole North America, this is a chart going all the way to 2095, an animation showing our soil moisture, with brown being, you know, drier and blue being wetter. And you can see that the central Mexico, Central America, and the Southwest generally is going to be hugely drought stricken. And if we zoom in a bit on that Central America area, there's an area already known as the dry corridor, right? And what's happening in the dry corridor there? Well, in El Salvador, this is back in summer of 2018. And if you look 2 months later in August of 2018, those water bodies are just totally dried up, and the crops and vegetation are all dead from the drought. And so what happened here is that, was it any surprise that a few months later in November of that year, that migrants from Central America started making their way up through Mexico to the United States, maybe to be met by a wall and to keep them out. And the reason for them coming is basically that they're hungry. The scholars who have been studying this know that these are not terrorists coming, they're not criminals, they're basically hungry people trying to feed their families, and they can no longer do that on their land. And this really is the canary in the coal mine, at least for Central America, where that drying conditions is already sending migrants north. And this will happen with more and more intensity in the years ahead. We have to try to address this, or we will have climate refugees pressing on our southern border. Now, let me switch gears a moment and talk about, we've been talking about air temperature. I want to talk a bit about ocean temperatures, because in fact, over 90% of the heat energy that's being trapped in our atmosphere is going into our oceans and warming the oceans. And so our oceans also have heat waves like we have. We just don't talk about it, we don't see them, but the scientists are measuring them, and you can also see the alarming rate of ocean temperature rise. The negative impacts and consequences have been, I can only show some of them, but this is the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reefs in Australia, which suffered widespread bleaching several times in the last 5 years. You can see the white is really where they've bleached out and died. Now, some of them can recover, but if it's a multi-year bleaching event, then they may not recover, actually. And so they've had a massive die-off of coral, and in the last 30 years, down 30%. They've lost half of the coral in the last 30 years, with the majority of it just in the last few years, 5 years. One other impact of the warming oceans in the Australian area is that the sea turtle sex is determined by the temperature of the water when they're born. And now in the Great Barrier Reef, 99% of the young green sea turtles are female. And so that's the human impact on the oceans is causing a big problem. If it's 99% female, there's a problem about to happen there. So the cost of this carbon pollution, it just tallies up. We won't have time in this presentation to go through everything, but we touched on political instability, wildfires, droughts. We didn't get to storm damage too much, ocean acidification, a whole other topic. And down the right-hand side, species extinction, melting glaciers. You guys are all from the Earth Care group, so you've heard all this before. This, according to the World Economic Forum in Davos, 4 years in running now, has is not just a threat to our planet, but the #1 threat to the global economy. So in the question of must we change, let's nod our heads. But before we nod our heads, I want to ask you the question of who's the we in must we change? Okay, so let me ask you the question. What country is the biggest carbon polluter in the world? Is it China? Is it the US? Is it Russia or Saudi Arabia? Just type in ABCD or type in the whole country name, and let's see what you guys think. I've got a China, I've got a USA. Any other guesses? B, USA, China, China. Some Chinas, US or China. All right, okay. So what's another China, a vote for China? Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look. This is a look at the globe with a larger the bubble, the larger the carbon polluter. And the big blue bubble is China. In fact, they are currently the world's largest CO2 polluter. The United States is in second in the big red, India's third, Russia's fourth. Now, I was just on a conference call this morning, actually, with where I heard a presentation which talked about why this chart is actually very misleading. And that is because with all the trade that's happening with the US and China and the trade imbalance, we are importing, China is making a lot of goods for us and a lot of steel goods and so forth, where the embodied carbon of steel made in China has twice the carbon footprint of steel made in the US, simply because the energy in China, they get 70% from coal, very dirty, as compared to the electricity and energy in the United States. So we've sort of outsourced our pollution to China. That's why their bubble is bigger, but we're really driving that and importing that back in. So it's possible that our bubble actually, although it shows #2, maybe the United States is actually the biggest polluter. But my point of showing you all this is to just say, if we're going to solve the climate crisis, which bubbles should be working on the problem? And I would say that Americans and Chinese are actually the key to life on planet Earth, or maybe question mark. How many of you would agree that our two countries really have to take the lead? It's not the small bubbles that are going to go solve this problem. It's the big ones, right? And I am a Chinese American, so sometimes when I look at this chart, I actually feel doubly guilty. I was like, oh no, I feel like that. But then I'm sort of try to be a positive thinker. So I say, oh, well, maybe I could be part of the solution to both these countries, since I am Chinese and American. And I would invite all of you as Americans, or in the case of Alice, a Chinese American, to get involved and do our role as Americans or Chinese Americans to be part of the solution. Now, I was very hopeful that in 2014, when this picture was taken, that our leaders, after decades of gridlock saying, no, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. I'm not going to do it until you do. Nope. They shook hands. They said, nope, let's get the Paris Agreement signed and let's work together to solve the climate crisis. This made me very encouraged in 2014 and 2015. But, if we look at US-China relations today, it's absolutely terrible relationships. And I wonder, will it stay that way? Or can we improve in time to address the climate crisis? So must we change? We, in my view, US and China? Well, yes, I think we absolutely must change. So then the next question is, can we change, right? So we're on our second question. And the answer to this question is a very, very exciting and positive information. So let's talk about what we have to change. And so I'm going to ask you here, this is a chart of climate pollution for Silicon Valley. So it's where you guys live. Well, it's pretty much the same where I live too, but I got this statistic from Silicon Valley source. So I want you to guess, what's the biggest source, that's the right-hand side of the pie, of pollution in your area? Is it buildings, farming, industrial, or transportation? Go ahead and put that in the chat if you think, what's the top source of climate pollution in your area? That's the aqua colors on the right-hand side. We got some votes for transportation, buildings, farming. It's 4 choices, so you got a 25% chance. Some more. We've got transportation, industrial. Okay. Got a lot of good guesses there. All right. Well, let's reveal what it actually is. It turns out transportation, both passenger vehicles, so 36%, and other vehicles like trucks are 15%. So that's about half of the pollution comes from cars. Buildings in the dark are 30%. And so, between those two areas, that's when we talk about having solutions, we need to try to think of what solutions we have to address transportation and buildings. And so the good news is that countries are planning to phase out fossil fuels, at least on the transportation front. There's a lot of movement to fossil-free cars, and countries from Norway who wants to phase out all their cars by 2025. And you can see this list of other countries that are planning to phase out gas vehicles. And in our state of California, last fall, because of the fires, right, Governor Newsom announced an executive order that by 2035, we would stop selling passenger vehicles unless they were zero emission vehicles. And so California is in the hunt to do better. And in California specifically, EVs are we're the leading state in the world to do that. We need to do better than this, but we are actually, I think, number one in terms of uptake of EVs. All these manufacturers here are either designing or already launched electric vehicles. And so there are a lot more coming, and they're getting better and better. But I've actually driven a Nissan Leaf since its very inception back in 2012. And so I want to share with you a little bit of my experience in terms of fuel consumption. And I want to compare my two cars, which one is a Toyota RAV4 2002. And just let's pretend if I would drive it 10,000 miles a year. And if gas now is costing $3.50 a gallon, that car gets 20 miles per gallon at 17.5 cents per mile. And that means I'm spending $1,750 a year to drive my Toyota. My Nissan Leaf, on the other hand, if it also goes 10,000 miles now, we don't fill it up with gas, we fill it up with electrons, and those electrons cost on average 16 cents a kilowatt hour. And that means that per mile, can go 4 cents per mile. And that means that my annual fuel cost there is just $400. And I can actually save $1,350 each year from driving my electric vehicle, right? So back in 2012, those EVs were more expensive, but they over time saved you money. Today, the price of EVs is coming down, and there's still a $7,500 federal tax credit for most vehicles. And so, and secondhand EVs are actually very, very affordable. So I actually think it's pretty good on the economics. Now, for any of you who'd be interested in trying an electric vehicle, the good news I found out is that for those of you in San Mateo County, you can try an EV for free. And that is through Peninsula Clean Energy, your alternative energy provider to PG&E. And on their website, it shows you right there, you can rent an EV for free, and they'll give you a $200 rebate after the fact, right? So one good thing about driving an EV in your area there, Portola Valley, is that the Peninsula Clean Energy, your provider, is providing all your homes and your church with 100% emission-free power. They just announced this on March 12th. This is a new press release. And that means that if you got an EV, or for those of you who already have one, and you're charging it at your home or at the church, you're basically driving a solar-powered car or wind-powered car. And it already has no emissions. And for those of you from the congregation that live in Santa Clara County, you're serviced by Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and their electricity is also already 100% emission-free for all customers. You guys are really lucky. That's not the case for most of the rest of the Bay Area. In my area, it's more like, it's a lower number than 100%. So if you have an EV there, you're basically already part of the solution to addressing this pie that we were talking about on the right-hand side. So let's go on to away from cars and move to buildings for a moment, because let's see what we can do to address pollution from buildings. Now, I want to share with you some statistics from my city of Lafayette. I couldn't find your data for your area, but this is probably about the same. And this chart shows for residential homes, what is the greenhouse gas footprint of your home? And most of our homes have electricity and natural gas, right, powering us. And you can see over the years from 2005 to 2015 that the blue emissions from natural gas is about twice as much of the carbon footprint as our electricity, which is in green. And over time, so the good news is, at least for you guys there, I was telling you that as of 2021, because Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Peninsula Clean Energy have 0% emissions, that's 100% clean, your homes are already on the electricity side, non-polluting. But what about the blue bars? What is the game plan to remove the blue bars, which was bigger than the green bars in the first place, right? So the answer is that actually in society, we have not done much to get rid of blue bars, the natural gas in our homes. And it was really only recently that we as a society of Californians have started to turn our attention to addressing this, the natural gas in our homes. And so I want to tell you a story of how 2 years ago, when I thought about getting rid of I never thought about getting rid of natural gas in my house because I thought it was going to be expensive or it was impossible. It was just not something. And I had already put solar, I drove an electric vehicle, and I'm in the industry for solar and a climate activist. And I thought it would be hard to get rid of natural gas. But I started to hear a new word called building decarbonization, and reading more of the research about decarbonizing our buildings, I realized and learned that electric appliances were actually very common. They were getting better and getting cheaper. And in particular, heat pump technology was really making huge strides. And this is a picture of a heat pump mini splits, something that will provide air conditioning and heating to our homes. And this is a retail store in Japan where they're extremely common. And when I realized that when they talked about mini split heat pumps, that when I traveled in Asia, whether it was in China or Taiwan or Hong Kong or Philippines, I would see these in every bedroom I was in or every office or study. Everybody uses this to heat and cool their rooms. And do you think the Asians do that because it's expensive? No, of course not. It's cheaper and it's better. It's just we in America happen to be using 1950s technology to heat and cool our homes. And so I said, oh my goodness, this is wonderful that these are all available, but we don't use them. We're not used to it here in the US, but the solutions are there. So I actually embarked on this process of trying to remove all fossil fuels in my homes and go all electric. And on the left is a picture of my heat pump hot water system. So I got rid of my gas water heater. I got rid of my gas fireplace and changed it to an electric fireplace. I changed my gas cooktop to an advanced induction electric. And then, as I said, I used a heat pump mini split for my air conditioning and cooling. And all of that, amazing to me. It only took 45 days to do. And at the end of the 45 days, I called up PG&E and I said, take away my meter. I want to get myself off the gas grid. So that's me on the last day there, turning my meter off, and PG&E came for free and they took my meter away. And so my house is no longer connected to the PG&E gas grid. And instead it's powered by the 15 solar panels on my roof, which handle about half my energy load. And then I buy the rest, which is 100% renewable from my provider, MCE. And so I can say now that I actually have a zero emission home, something I never imagined even just 2 years ago that it could be done. And so it just goes to show me that sometimes we set our expectations too low and that we can always do more than we even imagine we can do. So let me pause there to say, today I won't do the whole case study because next Thursday session, I'm going to be in a breakout room where I will share the actual more details of the case study of how I converted my house to an all electric house. Okay, so come next week again to find details. So The answer, can we change? And can we change what we drive and what the buildings? Yes, absolutely. It's actually all the technologies are available and right around us. We just have to have the willpower to do this. And so that leads us to the final question. Will we change? Do we have that willpower? Well, here, there's also some exciting news to share. Let me start at the global level first, at the international level, and say that, as I mentioned, in 2015, the Paris Climate Accord was signed by all countries of the world and unanimously agreed to try to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the mid-century. And we all know that the last president famously said he wanted to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. And you can announce that, but it actually takes 4 years, but you have to give 4 years notice. So it ran until November 5th, I think, of 2020, just after this election. And we actually got out of the Paris Agreement. But then when the new president came in, Joe Biden came in on January 21st, his first day announcement that very day was that we were going to re-enter the Paris Agreement. And so within 30 days, that is by February 21st, we were back in. So we were only out for a couple months there. And I think it's very important for the US, again, going back to the bubble chart I showed you before, how can we have a good conscience of ethics and morals if we are the biggest bubble there and we're saying we're not going to do anything, right? That's just, I think, unfair, unethical. So I'm proud that we're back in the Paris Agreement. I think another big news of having this president come in was this is the first president that put climate at the top of their policy agenda, in the top 4 of the agenda items. And I love seeing any president do that. I'm glad the current president is. And we've heard this term that build back better. So let's come out of coronavirus, not building back the same economy and the same fossil fuel-based industries that we had before. Let's use this $2 trillion to build something green and better and different. Let's create union jobs, more electric vehicles and carbon-free power. Let's earmark all those funds for good things to transition us to a better place. And something new he did that I thought was very important was that the structure of US government is really not structured to tackle climate change. And so new structures like appointing John Kerry to be the international special envoy. So that's a new department, new role. And then Gina McCarthy on the lower right to do domestic. So she's in the White House to integrate the domestic planning. These are, I think, key indications that they knew they cannot just use the existing government infrastructure. They have to do things differently. That it made me encouraged. And finally, also, this president has also said we want disadvantaged communities to receive 40% of the economic benefits of this stimulus money for clean energy and infrastructure benefits. We want it to go not to rich people, but to disadvantaged people, 40%. So I think there are exciting things to happen and watching there. For any of you on this call who are interested in getting involved in pressing for strong federal action, the Climate Reality Project, which I work with or I volunteer for, is having a campaign to really push in the next 2 years, where they believe that they have Senate, House, and the White House in line to contribute to strong federal policies. It's a very short window of time, right? The next 18 months before the election. And so, and even one term of Biden, there's just this is the time to our climate moment to take action. So I'd encourage you to get involved if you're interested. All right, let me turn to another topic, which Alice asked me to talk about, which is like, what can you do and to be part of the solution? I talked a little bit about cars and your buildings already, but let me just throw out a couple more things. And I'd love to, in the discussion that we have afterwards, have you share other things, but let me share some of ideas of things I'm doing. And number one is that a few years ago, I decided to eat more of a plant-based diet, because we know that by reducing red meat consumption, it means that there are less cows that are burping and farting methane gas, which is a very big greenhouse gas contributor. And so I started like 1 day a week, like meatless Mondays. I used to eat everything, fish, chicken, beef, but I would do meatless Mondays. And before long, I found there are many delicious foods in this area. And Tuesday, Wednesday. So more than 80% or 90% of the time now, I am able to eat a plant-based diet. And I'm particularly grateful to some of the new technologies in plant-based meat that are out there, like the Impossible Burger, which tastes like the Impossible Whopper here that I tried. And I even had my parents to try it, and they thought it was pretty good too. So whether it's Impossible or Beyond Burgers, somebody put in the chat, Emily, Beyond Burgers, I agree. I love their sausages, the hot Italian sausage. So there's some tasty choices. Now, here's a little bit of a eye chart, tough slide to look at, but why is plant-based meat better than their meat counterparts? For a couple reasons. Whether it's from an aquatic pollutant point of view, there's a negative 92% less impact, and global warming potential, minus 89%, land occupation, much less land. Half the land on the planet today apparently is really used to raise the feedstock to feed to cows so that it's fed to us. Cows' meat is a very inefficient way for us to get protein as humans. And therefore, there's a lot of water consumption going to water those crops to feed to cows. So anyways, this is the impact of going to a plant-based diet is very good for a planet. And so I really enjoy going to Safeway and going down the aisle to look at all the new products coming out. I just buy everything, every week, try something new. This one from Pure, tasted like cardboard. I don't recommend you try that. Wasn't that great? But this one, the Alpha Crumble, that one made some pretty good spaghetti sauce, and that was pretty good. So I'm having fun cooking and trying all these different foods. Another solution, so I was telling you about going solar. I told you I got an electric car, so this was way back in 2012. And even though I told you guys that your energy providers are already giving you 100% clean energy right now, you can still choose to put solar on your rooftops. And I told you I was in the solar business. And so this is something that I track very closely. And that's my system. As I said, 15 panels on my roof. I have 3,500 watts, but on the right-hand side, just quote you a 4,000 watt system, which is a 4 kilowatt solar system, which Tesla right now has the best deal in town, Tesla Solar. $10,000 for that, minus the 26% federal tax credit, which is good for this year and next year. That was extended, so you can still time to act this year. It's $7,400 for solar system. If you want battery backup so that in a power safety shutoff, you can have electricity, a Tesla Powerwall is running about $7,700. So these are the best pricing I've seen in many, many years. It just goes to show you that the industry is working very, very hard to compete. And so you could definitely save money by going solar at this time. So another area that maybe the final area I'll talk about is the importance of raising your voices, or raising my voice, or being an activist. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I spent my childhood there. And on the 18 years I lived there, I never marched on Washington, D.C. And it wasn't until 2019, when I was well into my 50s, that I actually went to join the youth climate strike to protest for the climate action. And so there I was back a couple of years ago. I realized that, wow, why did I wait this long to be marching in the streets in Washington, D.C.? So it's never too late, but I do think each of us has a voice, and we've got to use it. And by joining civilian groups that are helping to raise our voices, I have found that working together with others has been an important part of my climate activism. And so when we say, what are the things, what can we do to really, where's the, will we change? What do we have the will to use our voices and speak up? Do we have our will to use our votes of who we're going to vote for, or the choices of what we buy? Will we buy the plant-based meats? Will we buy an electric car? We all have these abilities to show that we have the willpower to fight the climate crisis. And so I ask you, and I know you guys are some of the core, most interested people. I'm sure you're already doing all these things, but those are the things we need to do, simply speaking, to make it better for our next generation. These are my kids now, 15 years later from seeing that movie. They're all in their 20s now. And so they're old enough to get active in climate. But the planet is there for all of us to take care of. Our world depends on our actions. And so I thank you for being here tonight and starting this 3-week of 3 questions. And I hope that the 3 questions I talked to about tonight also help to answer some of yours. So let me pause my presentation there, and we can do a little bit of Q&A. And then we're also going to do a little bit of breakout rooms so that we can discuss. I have some secret topics that I'm going to ask you to discuss in your breakouts. But anyways, thank you very much for your attention. All right, thank you for the applause, the silent applause. Thank you so much. All right. So we have, let's see, the time is 7:42. What we could do about a few minutes of questions, and then we'll do a little bit of a breakout room. Does anybody want to either physically raise your hand, because I think I can see all of you, or to virtually raise your hand and I'll just call on you? Any questions or reactions?
I think Bob has a question in the
Okay,
chat.
hi Bob, go ahead. Bob.
Hi, I have a question which I put in the chat, but I'll just ask it out loud like this.
Yeah.
In your experience, you must have encountered people who have resistance to following your lead in converting from fossil fueled appliances to electric. And I was wondering, what are the top 2 or 3 or 4 reasons that people cite? And then more importantly, what could our church do, and specifically our Earth Care team, to help address those resistances?
That's a great question. So if the question specifically relates to converting our homes to be away from natural gas and moving to all electric, I think the biggest resistance is that we all love our gas stoves, right? We love cooking on gas. In fact, that statement, cooking on gas, is a marketing. I told you I was in advertising before. Our industry made that up so you guys would think that was good. In fact, the word natural gas is a marketing term that came up in the 70s. You know, it's not really natural. We're sort of swirled with marketing around us and thinking that that's good. And a lot of people do, enjoy cooking on gas, including me and my wife, especially Chinese wok cuisine. So that seems to, most people would say, I don't care about my water heater or my furnace. I don't even see those things, but my stove, pry it out of my dead hands, right? So that is one area that the industry knows we have to talk about why induction cooktops are safer and perform better. When I went shopping for this, and when I started studying the natural gas cooktop, it never occurred to me that it's, when you burn something in your house, would you park your car in your living room, turn it on and burn gasoline and let the exhaust in your kitchen? No, none of us would put our car in our living room and burn a fuel, but we do that every day with natural gas. Why is that correct? It turns out it's not. The EPA, which regulates air pollution, only can regulate outdoor air pollution. The EPA does not regulate indoor air pollution. If it did, more than 50% of California homes would fail. And to me, I don't know why that we let these dangerous PM 2.5 or nitrogen dioxide or formaldehyde, all these obviously combustion elements are in our kitchen. And myself, when I boiled water, I never turned the fan on the top for just boiling water, but it turns out we need to turn a good fan on when we're doing this. So anyways, that's a little bit of a hint that the health effect, the negative health consequences, especially for children, asthma and those type of respiratory illnesses, they're very sensitive to it. So if we can get rid of gas cooktops, it would be better for health. And so you will start to see the more and more communications and education around that piece. And you could do that. Your church could also offer an induction, they call them hobs, but they're a single induction thing that you can plug in 120 volt, and then people can try an induction, try before you buy, right? You can buy one, they're probably $120. You get a and a pan that works on it. And then people who want to try it, they can try it a little bit before they go out and buy one. So maybe your church could consider a try before you buy, and you can talk to me about that afterwards. I want to set up a plan for that in Lafayette through a nonprofit and let people come and pick them up and try it.
We would love, I want to give other people a chance to ask questions, but I just want to respond to one thing. On behalf of our Earth Care team, we would love to have a continuing relationship with you to get ideas for the future.
Absolutely, and I'd be delighted to do that. And Jenny Warner says, as a mother of a culinary student, oh, we do love our gas cooking. Oh, but I will say that Wolfgang Puck and a number of Thomas Keller, they are cooking on induction because it's cooler in the kitchen. There's, can you imagine, you got all these, the temperature in the kitchens and then the amount of air conditioning needed to keep the kitchen cool. You know how much money is going up through the vents? And they don't make that money in the restaurants. So if they can go to induction cooktops, it's much cooler. The culinary schools are teaching their students to cook on induction. So it's preferred. And so that's actually very interesting. Many top chefs really do enjoy induction cooking. It's not a complete sacrifice. But
maybe we could ask you to connect us up with someone who could perform a class to teach us about induction cooking, because I agree with what Jenny was saying. It's not just that it's the kind of fuel, it's the ability to have finite and variable temperature, and it's immediately changing as opposed to waiting for the coil to go up and down. I think it would be great to learn to see if these induction methods can approximate that kind of control.
Yes. How many people, by a show of hands, anybody have an induction cooktop here? Susan, Steve, Ginger, is she raising it? So Darlene, what's your feedback? Who wants to be brave and share your feedback?
We have one in a studio that we rent out. And our son lived in that studio and he's a chef. And we did it because we couldn't run natural gas to the studio, and he loved it. He thought it was great. And it does respond. It is very responsive as you adjust the heat. So
thank you. How about Ginger or Susan? Did you want to chime in?
I'm in a similar situation as Darlene. I have an induction in my little cottage out back, my Airbnb business, and it's very popular with guests. And I have an extremely old, tired gas stove that's about to go away. So this is very timely to learn about this. So I'll definitely.
Yes, you do need to wire it up for 240 volts. And so I did the thing myself. I pulled it out with a buddy and we replaced, but I had to hire an electrician to drop the 240 volt line in there.
Okay, but, good to keep that in mind. And yeah. I'm going solar this year, so
yeah,
I have EV. Yeah.
Okay. So
in
other
our
question,
new place,
Susan.
I was going to say, in our new place in Carmel Valley, where we are right now, it just takes a little getting used to. But yeah, you don't have to have the temperature up quite so high, and you do have to get used to certain. A little different on certain things, but you'll get used to it quickly enough. Yeah, it's good. My sister already had it in Massachusetts too, so I had seen it before. Yeah, when you're used to gas, it does take a little bit of getting used to something different, but I think definitely much quicker than regular electric, to say the least.
Compared to the radiant coils of the 60s, which is what most people think of. This is a totally
much better.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes. Go ahead, Alice.
Sorry. Are you telling us to sell our cast iron skillets now?
No, the cast iron is great on it.
Oh, is it? Okay.
If you can put a magnet to, if a magnet attaches, then it's good. It'll work on induction. If you have aluminum cookware and it doesn't attach, then it won't work. Good question. Alice.
I was going to ask a different kind of question about what's the comparison between personal use of output of emission versus industrial emission in terms of the size of it. There's
Are you talking
industry,
about the induction cooktop?
no, about just in general. Does industry put out more, emit more carbon than personal?
Well, no, on the chart that I showed you, at least for the Bay Area here.
Not for the Bay Area, yeah.
Yeah, nationwide, I think that the energy grid is actually, transportation is big everywhere. And then the electricity grid is also a big contributor because they burn coal in a lot of places around the country too. And when you say industrial users who use electricity, they're using, getting it from coal from West Virginia and the Midwest and so forth. So the effort to, at least in California, the effort to get to 100% clean electricity, which more and more states have embraced, is a key pathway to phasing out coal plants and cleaning up the industrial sector. I see a question in the chat about some good questions here. What about the noise from outside heat pump and the neighbors? And do in-ground coils for heat pump make sense here? Okay, so a heat pump actually is like, for all of us who have air conditioning in our houses, you have an air conditioning condenser fan outside that sort of sounds like a jet engine when it goes off. It's so loud, it's so powerful. The heat pump technology is similar to that, but much gentler fan. It doesn't have to, that's one reason why it's very efficient. It doesn't spin so fast. So it's less noisy than existing air conditioning equipment, but it does have a fan. And mine that I have are whisper quiet, and you could stand by them, and they're about as loud as a refrigerator outside, but they do have a fan, make noise. Now the question of, does in-ground coils make sense? When I was talking about my mini split, that's for next week to show pictures, but they're called air source or ground source heat pumps. The air source takes heat from the air outside and moves it into your house. A ground source one takes heat from the ground, which averages about 50 degrees Fahrenheit year round. And so in Minnesota, that's a good thing to have warm ground and bring it in. So ground sources are more for cold weather applications, but in California, we use pretty much air source. We can get the free warm air. And so it doesn't really make sense to do ground source here in California. And there was a question about car batteries and solar panels can't be recycled. If you mean EV car batteries made of lithium ion, they can be recycled, and they are, but they're not economical compared to virgin lithium. That's sort of like paper, right? If you go to Staples and you buy a ream of recycled paper, it costs more than virgin paper. And so many people just buy virgin paper. And that's happening in the lithium market too, because people want cheaper cars. They don't buy the recycled product. Those are the economics that have to be worked on, just like we did with paper. The solar panels, you're right, that they cannot be easily recycled, but they do have a 25-year lifespan or more. And so it's a product that, unlike our phones, which might be thrown away every few years, or our computers, the solar panels have a very long life cycle. And at least in Europe, where they have developed recycling methods. And in the United States, where we've deployed solar only since about 2010, we're only about 10 years into it. Many people think we still have another decade or more before we see a mass number of recycling facilities pop up. Let's see, LED is 90% more efficient than regular incandescent bulbs. Yes, that's a good thing to do for a change. And let's see, did I get any other questions? Other questions? Raise your hand. I think I've got through many of these. Oh, okay.
Just a quick one on insulation. Well, what's the percentage of energy that's wasted through poor insulation of buildings as opposed to greenhouse gas emission coming from burning gas?
That's a great question. So and again, next Thursday, I'm going to discuss that. When I electrified my house, I thought it was all about swapping out my gas appliance for electric, but the contractor came in and said, the first step is actually to redo your attic insulation and do gap sealing so that you don't waste all that electricity, right? You don't waste that energy. And the very famous Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute has said that the impact of energy efficiency measures in terms of better insulation is much more impactful than all these types of renewable technologies. So it is actually something the Biden administration, from $2 trillion, there's a lot of that dollars flowing to energy efficiency. It's not that sexy compared to the other technologies, but it's actually, as you point out, highly impactful, and it can create jobs all over the country to insulate all of our houses. So that's a great question. Bob.
Just a quick overview of the economics of replacing hot water heaters that are typically gas fired to what's the electric?
Heat pump, electric,
equivalent?
Yep. Oh, is it a question?
Well, do they make sense financially? Because
Okay,
a lot
the
of
answer
people
to
have
that-
a hot water heater that might be reaching the end of its useful life.
If I
So it
answer
might
that,
be
then none of you are going
time
to come
to-
to my talk next Thursday.
Good.
No, I'm just kidding you. The
I
answer
will.
is that when I replace my gas water heater, if I replace gas for gas, it would have probably cost me $1,200 to replace. But if I do it gas for heat pump, it costs $5,000, right? And it is because these technologies require that 240 electric line to be put in. It requires an electrician and a plumber. So you got two trades involved. It's much more advanced technology. And again, it saves you money over time, but the upfront cost is higher, close to $5,000. The good news is that, as I mentioned, the state of California is and putting incentives in place. And if you go to that website for Peninsula Clean Energy, it talks about a $2,500 to $3,500 incentive to be chopped off the $5,000. So it may cost somewhere between $1,500 to $2,500 for you, which closes the gap significantly to that $1,200 number that would be the gas replacement anyways. It's difficult. The governments are not going to be able to fund all of that and so industry, because it's such a small niche, we have to get those economics to improve, and the 5,000 needs to come down less and less. But that's a good question. And remember that over time, that's much more. Those heat pumps are like 300% efficient at heating your water compared to mine. What I got rid of was 58% efficient on the gas side. Okay. All right. You want to do any other pressing questions? Otherwise, I think we have maybe 12 or 15 minutes left to go, but I wanted to talk a little bit or quiz you guys again on one more thing, which is part of the program today, was to talk about the moral and ethical aspect of the climate crisis and climate action. Because let me just share my screen again with you. Because for me, I told you that one of the main reasons I took action, can you see my screen?
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. One of the main reasons I took action on climate change and why I felt it was a moral issue, and I still, after 10 years, I think what drives me most is the ethics of, I find it difficult to spend my time doing and enjoy doing other things when I know that the planet is burning. And I sort of think of myself as I'm on the Titanic, the ship, right? And then we're heading, and I went up to the crow's nest in the telescope. I could see that there was an iceberg ahead, right? And so they say, oh, we're heading for the iceberg. It'll probably be in 90 days. We're going to hit it. And then if you went back down onto the 7th floor deck and they said, well, come play bingo and let's go dancing and play tennis. I mean, honestly, is that what you can do? No, I sort of feel like we have only 90 days left. We better tell the captain, we better do all these things in order to, bend the curve or bend the direction of the ship. And so to me, that the ethical question is the upper left-hand corner, was that I felt an obligation to future generations, to my children. And I thought it was really unfair that we, the adults of today, would leave the world in a wreck, with climate refugees and so forth. But the more, as I have been in this space for now a decade, I've actually been attuned to the other ethical issues of extinction of other species, like humans being a superior to this turtle and saying, you know, because we want to drive our car, you will go extinct. Good grief. And the other uneven impact of rich countries versus poor countries, like those guys in El Salvador, they did not cause this problem, but now they can't eat and they're going to come up against a wall with barbed wire and throw their kids over it. And that's just unfair. And finally, on the lower right-hand corner, like the poor people are just like COVID, they have much less resilience to impacts of disasters compared to rich people. So we have multiple ethical areas where I think a rich country like America just cannot have a place to stand on except to take strong action. And so I wanted to just see if we could, I would like to know what you guys think, or what motivates you, or what do you worry about, or what do you think is the most important ethical issue to you on climate change? Who's brave and will raise a hand and throw out some thoughts?
Well, I'll start. We had a wonderful service on Sunday with some statements of faith and why it led us to earth care being a priority. And for me, it is falling short of the sacred duty of leaving the world, leaving our children and grandchildren a livable world. I think it is just unconscionable not to do everything we can to prevent that happening.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Darlene's giving you the thumbs up in agreement. So you also feel like one of the things driving you is the future generations of humans and that again was my main motivator, and it is still that. What other ideas? What motivates? What gets you worried?
Go
ahead.
I see Diane, a name Diane, but it doesn't sound like a
that's
Diane.
my wife. I'm on using her laptop.
Go ahead.
This is Joe. The thing that worries me most is if I'm representative of a lot of people in our society, then we're in trouble, because I care a lot about this, or at least I say I do. And here and there in my own personal life, I make some changes, but not as significant and complete as you do. I do work in trying to help people in marketing and advertising with environmental initiatives, but I just feel a little bit guilty and concerned about my own indifference when it comes down to making personal choices.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate your candor there, and you're not alone in that sense and that's how I have felt before too. I felt like, we're busy with kids or business, or there's all these things, and it's sort of unfair. Like, believe me, I wish I wasn't having to do this all the time, right? I wish I could be back in advertising or doing something like that. And I think that that's where I think, speaking up or picking from sort of that menu of options of what we could do. But changing policies is really changing mindset, speaking up, and creating the momentum of the movement for change. It's happening, right? Over the last decade, we could see it rising, but we just have to get it going further. And so finding some ways to speak up, I think, is important. Let's go with Darlene, and then Jane, and then Craig.
I think it's easy to be overwhelmed by the scope of the problem and by all of the solutions that are being offered here. A lot of them are expensive. Perhaps we can't afford to do all of them. However, I invite all of us to look at one or two things that we can do. What one or two things can do? Where can you start? And then once those are done, look at what are another one or two things. I mean, if you did 2 a year or 1 a month or something like that, you would see that you would make progress. So it's just finding a way to begin simply and not try and get your arms around the whole thing.
That's wonderful advice. And I totally agree. Like, I just try to do one step at a time, one at a time. And before you know it, you really get going.
Yeah.
But trying to boil the ocean and solve climate change is very depressing. So just do one step at a time. And here's one inexpensive thing to do is to write your elected officials, call your local council member, to see if your local council members are doing things to support building electrification and electric vehicles. And just those are all free things. They do take time, but those councils want to hear from you. And you can make change in your community. Let's go with Carrie and Pierre. And you're on mute.
Thank you. I think it's climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. I think to me can't be any doubt about that. And we have the means to solve it in the developed world. We have the financial means. It's a question of treating it as a priority. I think what drives me is nature, is the destruction of nature is so blatant and can be avoided, and nature is what connects us to our true self, at least for me. And I draw a lot of inspiration from being in nature, and I want to leave the planet, this nature for the next generations to enjoy, just like we have. And it saddens me to see destructions of species such as polar bears, for instance, with the melting of the ice cap is tragic. And yeah, it's all there before our very eyes, and there's deep inaction. And sometimes I get quite concerned that, well, it's obvious that people have different priorities, but it saddens me.
Yes. Thank you, Pierre, for the comments. Let's go to Jane Tite and then Ann and Craig. I think Jane yeah.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. So I get overwhelmed by, the big problems. I would say the one that captures or is the face of it for me is the climate migration. What's happening at the borders, the families, the people that are hungry, these are not bad people. And it just seems like such a big problem. So that motivates me. And then, then I try and think of something really small I do. So recently I just opened my refrigerator. I was frustrated by all the plastics that you're using and how to get rid. So I thought, okay, I can get rid of, we use almond milk these days. I can make my own almond milk. So I'm not buying that plastic jug for almond milk anymore. I'm just making my own almond milk, putting it in a glass jar once a week. And that's just a simple thing. It makes me feel happier. It's a very, very small thing. So.
Well, being conscious of it and being able to, those small things create that consciousness level. So that's good. How about Ann and Craig? Did you're on mute. Yep.
Before this, I was on a call with David Brin, who's a science fiction author. And I've read science fiction ever since I was in high school. And the visions of science fiction show us worlds as they could be when we do things right, and they are cautionary tales about what we can really muck up and do very bad things to our world. And science fiction has shown me both sides of what can be good and what can be bad. David Brin, in particular, is a physicist, and one of his books called Earth deals with climate crisis in a way that is both horrifying, but yet a very important cautionary tale. So those stories, which we need to tell ourselves and others, I think can help people understand what can be if we do things right, and what can be if we fail to act.
When did that book come out, Craig?
That's been at least 10 years.
Okay, Earth, Earth.
It's a big book, but it's entertaining and not easy to see what the world could be if we don't do the right thing.
Right, right. Well, fiction and art to try to mold all sorts of techniques to try to move us. So thank you for sharing that. Shirley.
Yes, I'm the outlier. I'm from First Pres Palo Alto. I just wanted to respond to the comments when people say they feel overwhelmed. And I think that's such a huge problem. And what I have found really helpful is to be working on these issues within my community, within my church community. And whenever I get feeling just distraught about how overwhelming it all is, it is really helpful to have this group at our church that bolsters each other and works together. And I'm just really excited that you all have an Earth Care team, and I think you'll experience that kind of support. It's real important.
Thank you, Shirley. Great comment. Anne, were you gonna?
Yes, I'm going to hop in here, and I'm going to say thank you, Shirley, for that, because as part of the Earth Care team, I have already discovered that quite a wave of being just overwhelmed and disheartened, and then feeling support from others on the team, and finding my ground again, and then needing to be there for that person that just had helped me 2 weeks, prior. And so, yeah, I think it's really important for all of us to know we're in this canoe together, and to have each other's backs as we go forward. Thank you.
I definitely agree that having a community, because it's a marathon, right? And I go through cycles of, being optimistic and being, upset, and, it's good. I want to shout out to my buddy, Steve Schaefer here, who's a guest on this call. And he's also a climate leader like myself, and to come support me and be part of this. Other members of the Climate Reality Project are important to me, to have friends, as you said, Anne, because it's not always happy times, right? There are a lot of troubling times, and we need the emotional support to get to the next place. It's like a marathon.
I do get very concerned, Wei-Tai, when I hear we just have 10 more years to make the change, and I feel like, gee, can we do that in 10 years?
That's the IPCC report from now 2 years ago did say we have 10 years to take urgent action to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. That means to say that, we're already having wildfires at our doorstep, right? The sea turtles are already having 99% females. We're not going to be able to turn that around quickly, but we have to act very ambitiously in the next decade to stop burning fossil fuels. Otherwise, the consequences get pretty heavier. So, yeah, I think it is it's not going to be the end of the world in 10 years, but if we don't act around that time frame, then yeah, by mid-century, it's going to be harder and harder to turn it around. But I think we're going to do it. I mean, I look at all the good things and the momentum being built. There's always some challenges, but even when America said we're going to step out of the Paris Accord, how many other countries of 196 countries took that opportunity to get out also? 0. Right? Isn't that amazing? So while we can be angry of what happened here, the flip side was that nobody else got out. What does that say? That's really quite amazing. So everything has a little bit of a silver lining, right? Great. Other thoughts, other questions? Otherwise, let me just share a couple more images I want to share with you. And one is that I'm glad to be speaking to you today because I love your church. I was there in October 2018 for a wedding of a friend, and it's always such a treat to sit there and look at the trees that you have and say, "What? That's the most beautiful church I've ever seen." So I wish we were there in person, but I'll take a rain check and come visit you some other time. So in the meantime, I put my contact information in the chat. I welcome you to email me if you have any questions, or if you, I'm a public speaker for free. So if you have any other groups, companies or organizations that would like to hear a talk on climate, I would be happy to speak to your group and organization, and you'll be helping to get the word out about climate change and be part of the solution. So contact me at climatebuddy@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at climatebuddy. So with that.
And we will see you again next Thursday.
Next Thursday, I've got a little breakout room, right? 30 minutes, and we're going to dive into building electrification. Yep, we'll do the case study there. So back to Alice.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. Are we able to get some of your slides? Do you think?
You know, the slide presentation, you can record and replay it, but only trained climate leaders are, we can only distribute the slide to trained climate leaders. So, you know, some of them are my own slide, but I think it's, in general, it's not something that we distribute.
Okay.
But as I said, I'll come and speak to another group, or happy to talk to you about it.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful, informative evening.
Oh, it's my pleasure to see you all. Thank you for taking the time in your busy evenings to commit to learning more about the climate crisis. Day 1 of 3 to come. And I hope I'll see many of you next week.